brand, and Brian Straub from the Dortmund Dispatch. Brian, starting with you, how are you doing, my friend?
Doing well, man. I'm happy to be here. And I guess I speak for both me and Eli when we say we're happy to help you go along with this episode and make it the best episode that we can. So I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing good, much better than I did with hosting the first time. I was actively starting to get COVID symptoms as the session went on, and by the end, I was like, "All right,
Oh,
Jake,
damn.
thanks for coming." And then I just kind of knocked out for the last few days after that. So, Eli, how are you doing in your recent trip to Dortmund?
So the trip was fantastic. Paris, lovely city. They love me there. The shops love me there. Dortmund, the donor shops love me there. They're familiar. Several of them, 2 days, 2 donor shops. Would love to go back and hit the rest. The game was fantastic. I would like to shout out the woman in front of me. Every goal Dortmund scored, she passed around Haribo gummies. And as you're coming back from 2-0 down against your local rival, like there's not a better script in the world, honestly, to watch. Like you go to, I've been waiting like almost like 6, 7, 8 years now to go watch Dortmund. I finally get to go, and we come back like the 2-0 down. I got to feel the lows. I got to see the beer showers of the like last sip of 100 ultras beers, get them thrown at the net behind the goal, and then I get to be in the stadium for the end, for the like eruption at 4-2, the eruption at the 3-2, all the goals. It was a genuinely incredible experience. But I'm doing well now. Jet lag finally starting to fade. So happy to be here.
Man, that's awesome. Yeah, and I know Brian, you've been there too. You mentioned just I feel like I want to speak for all of us here when I say the expectations after so long of being a fan here from the US. You know, I was slightly nervous at first if it was going to match those. And not only did it match them, it fucking shattered them through the
Blows
roof.
them out of
I
the
mean,
water completely.
I was blown away. Yeah, it's if anybody ever gets the chance, please. And like you guys mentioned too, like you guys were able to get tickets for pretty cheap both times. I just went on the first market, or maybe it might have been like the secondary market, but much cheaper tickets than a lot of MLS teams here and like national team games for US. So it's relatively accessible, barring the trip there, of course. But that's awesome. I'm glad you were able to experience that. Yeah. Today, I just thought we could briefly touch on the Champions League game against Celtic and try to relive any of that high that we caught before crashing back down to earth in the loss against Berlin this weekend. Just starting with this Celtic game, do you guys have any initial thoughts? Did you think the result was going to be anywhere near that we saw?
I think Brian was a bit more conservative than me thinking about this result. I thought we were going to beat them comfortably. I was texting Brian and Ali, who are both friends of your podcast, that we should really rotate in Bayer because Karim Adeyemi has played a lot of minutes. And if you can't beat Celtic with Bayer, there's a serious issue there. I think right now Shaheen, especially at that time, was feeling a ton of pressure. So I get why he made the move to kind of stick with the most important player in our 11, in my opinion, because our press has not functioned at all without him. And he's also doing that while putting up 0.5 expected assists per game, which is very, very good. So, yeah, he went with the guy who he thought was going to give us the best chance to win. And sometimes you have to do that. And clearly, like at the second half, I said to my friend I was watching the game with, and I was like, I've seen enough of Adeyemi. It's 4-1 now. Like, let's take him off. 90 minutes 2 days ago. Didn't happen, and then it did not take long. I don't like to be right, but like there's a certain amount of common sense in like he played 90 minutes 2 days ago in a very high intensity position. Like wingers are the easiest players to substitute, and they are also like the players most commonly substituted because they are literally just performing sprints. Like that's their job. And And because they're also like the fastest players on the pitch, they're also more prone to like muscle injuries in many cases, because of that fast twitch muscle and like living on the edge of having to run like 6 kilometers a game and also sprint very quickly, 37, 38 kilometers an hour, whatever Adeyemi can do. So it's just like common sense things that you kind of have to deal with. Like, okay, you played him, you're winning 4-1, take him off. It like it just doesn't like add up to me.
Well, wingers are not aside. Shaheen has, for 3 fixtures in a row now in a span of 7 or 8 days, has played the exact same back line and almost the same midfield. Maybe Metro might have started and may just slip in my memory. But if I'm not wrong, it's been the double pivot between Gross and Chan. And of course, you want to build consistency in terms of performances. You want to get results, Eli, like you mentioned, when the pressure is building, but you are running that risk. And outside of Adeyemi, you are really running some of those other players in the back line to the ground. Sula could have gotten some more minutes. Of course, Mecha did come on in this Champions League game, but I mean, I would argue probably a little bit sooner, just given the form that he was in. Hell, even a start could have been in question too. But Brian, do you have any additional thoughts to anything? Or
Yeah, I mean, with Adeyemi, I mean, you're basically running him into the ground. I expected him to play for the first half, and obviously, once he already had that performance that he did, I was like, yeah, it's time to switch him out, give the guy a rest. There was no need to keep him on after that half. We could have just had fresh players come in, avoided the injury. When you're doing sprints the way he does, and then going up to like try and win headers that way, like you're running the risk of straining something, and that's exactly what happened. So it was a risk. Shaheen took it, and it didn't pay off. With regards to Bayer, I was definitely in the camp too that he should have started the game. I'm probably in the minority in saying this, but I'm very much pushing to see more of him and Girassi in a front too, because both these players are players that have excelled in that sort of format for both Hoffenheim and Stuttgart. So I think like maybe not making it, the go-to formation or, the first choice formation. I think you can still, work with that. I mean, we've seen that Shaheen is very much open to switching the formation mid-game, adapting the game and all of that. I mean, even if you want to take Brandt off, give him a rest, you take off the attacking midfielder, you put on another striker. Or as Eli has said before in our conversations, you can play him kind of in those half spaces. So there's options, right? And that gives Bayer more minutes to get into the form you want him to be in, to be a more important player for the team, because we saw a little bit of him in the beginning of the season. Then Girassi comes back. You don't see much of him. I personally don't know if I want to see him playing out wide as much. I mean, push comes to shove at this point, you're kind of going to have to with Duranville and Adeyemi out. I mean, he's one of the main options there at this point. But I do want to see more of that strike partnership, because I do think that him and Girassi can excel with regards to that.
you did see a bit more of that against Berlin, which of course we'll get into. But I just wanted to stick with Celtic for a few more minutes here. With Adeyemi's injury, initially it was reported 4 to 5 weeks, and now internal reports are suggesting it's going to be closer from 7 to 8. Please, if either of you have seen anything different from that, go ahead. Feel free to fact.
The reliable journalist came out and said 7 to 8 after the tabloids, with all due respect, kind of said the shorter number. So it's probably going to be the longer number. But also, like, with what just happened with Gio Reyna, I would also do a little bit of speculation that they're trying to get away from saying anyone's coming back a little quicker, because once a player like makes a squad, no one really complains about like it being fast unless they get injured. But if a player receives a delay, then all of a sudden there's like a bit more like negative feelings or people being upset.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, definitely including myself, saw the initial number and thought like, that's probably pretty conservative given just the luck that Dortmund has had for the last several years in terms of injuries. But yeah, very unfortunate for Adeyemi to find arguably the form of his life. He's had moments here and there at Dortmund, of course, but these past few weeks, you've really seen some genuine improvement in him, not and just in terms of the goal contributions, but I think also just the smaller things. I think his decision making is definitely, there's still room to be improvement there by a lot of stretch, of course, but he is improving in that sense. I'm just working in those tight areas. So, first hat trick is pretty iconic for him. That's, of course, congratulations to him, but it's very unfortunate for him to come off that early. Do you guys have any thoughts about like Celtic's performance in this, and why you guys think we were able to break them down so easily? Is it just as simple as like, I mean, I didn't watch much. I've said it before. I didn't know too much about Celtic football. I've seen teams under Brendan Rodgers here and there, and they could be a bit more attack minded. And of course, Celtic were, and they got caught here pretty early. But is there anything that else that stuck out to you guys that made us look pretty much unplayable for that night in Europe?
Adeyemi scored worldies. I think like that's the biggest difference. It's only like 0.4, 0.5, depending on what XG model was used to kind of differentiate us. So like they had chances. Kobel had a really nice save, I think, in the second half after the game was gone. But it's again, like I think Adeyemi has the one shot from like the left-hand side of the box that gets like a little deflection and it beats Schmeichel. Schmeichel has been throughout his career a very, very good shot stopper. But if you look at like him at the end of his time in the Premier League, there was a reason he kind of left the Premier League. And like that happens to every player. He's been a tremendous shot stopper. I mean no disrespect, but some of the finishes from Kareem Adeyemi are incredible, and some of them are like maybe a prime, yes, they're incredible, but prime Schmeichel might get to that one off like the turnover. Kareem Adeyemi makes an interception at the top of the box and then finishes in the near post. And I'm not like a near post, far post like person. You concede a goal, you concede a goal. You want to concede the least amount of goals, doesn't matter which post. But like prime Schmeichel might make one of the saves on the shots from distance. But like at the Champions League, once a bunch of balls start coming in, Dortmund are just started playing with a ton of confidence. And you look at like the strike from Nemecha, that's again another like worldy where he's hitting like post in, and like the finishes like that. Some nights it just happens like that, and that was clearly one of them.
Yeah, we have a lot of magical nights in Europe here. And I just want to make sure real quick, Brian, that Jake puts on the title of this episode that Eli disrespects Schmeichel. That's just going to be just totally kidding. Brian, go ahead.
I'm a fan.
That'll get people churning to listen to it, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. I honestly think that with this performance, Dortmund were looking for a reaction because the game against Bochum wasn't the reaction we thought it would be. Yeah, we win 4-2 in that one, but you still see a lot of the frailties in that game. I mean, you're watching a team dig itself out of a hole yet again. In this game, they took it by the scruff of the neck and we're just like, no, like we're going to win this and going to win it comfortably. And a lot of it, as Eli said, was Kareem Adeyemi. And he was a player that was just a man on a mission. I mean, he was doing everything in that game. I mean, winning the ball in the middle of the pitch, rushing towards the box on his own, carrying it, and then just either making a chance or scoring it himself. So I think he was kind of the embodiment of a lot of what I would say a lot of the players felt. The need to show what you're capable of. And that game really shows what Dortmund is capable of. And as we'll, I guess, talk about with the Union Berlin game, I mean, it's a little bit baffling. You get performances like that where it's a 7-1 absolute throttling, and then you get a 2-1 against Union, which I'm not saying in any way is a weak side, because they have started this season relatively well by their own standards. So they're definitely an improvement over what sort of game they played last season. So overall, I think the Celtic game was just a visceral reaction to being like, yeah, we haven't been playing that great the last prior 2 games. Let's show them what we're actually capable of. And they did. I just wish they kind of did that week in, week out.
Yeah, consistency has been a problem for some time now, and it's a shame that we were not able to build on that really whatsoever. I mean, many of the positives that we did see, of course, Adeyemi was unavailable, but just collectively, you could just tell. I mean, the team, again, lacked the bite, lacked the desire. They're not on the front foot. They're not starting well. Like you mentioned, Brian, I have a quote here that Shaheen said after the Berlin game, saying, "We got off to a weak start to the game. We only stuck to the plan in 1 and 2 scenes. At this level, you have to be there from the start. You can see goals like that. That cannot be right." And it's like, this has been an issue for several weeks now. We've mentioned it on the show for quite some time. Is there like a driving factor that comes to mind for either of you about why this team takes 40, 45, sometimes 60 minutes to even get back into a game that they should already be in?
Yeah, I mean, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? Um, I don't know. I mean, some people are chalking it up to rotation. I was reading that some people were indicating that that we're putting in different players and that's messing with the stability. I don't know what it is. Sometimes I just feel like Dortmund like to play up or down to their opposition, and we see results like that. I mean, maybe the 7-1 got them feeling a little cocky, and Union Berlin is not the side that you should be feeling cocky against, especially considering the results we've had against them in the past. And they are a very, dug in team when they need to be. And they showed that they're capable of getting points off of other teams this season. I believe it was Didi Hamann who criticized Dortmund for saying that, or not for saying, but for basically playing against like Union Berlin, who were a relegation side last season. But if you're taking, like, you can't always live in the past. You got to look at the results from this season as well. They're massively improved, and they've shown fight. I believe they either won 3-2 or came back for a 3-3 draw against Hoffenheim recently, actually. And I mean, that shows a level of fight that they're not, just a side that's going to lay down and allow Dortmund to run amok like they did against Celtic. They're definitely, at least in my opinion, a bit more of a physical side than the Celtic side that we played. So there's also that to take into account. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, they just need to take every opponent seriously. And just because you beat Celtic 7-1 in the Champions League doesn't mean you can come into this game and, kind of think you're going to coast. Now, I'm not going to say that that's what I think necessarily happened, but it's possible that, that sort of kind of overconfidence carried over. In the grand scheme of things, on a grander scale, I don't know. I really don't know what it is that kind of puts players, like when they come here, it's almost as if like they're performing at the clubs that they're at, then they come here and they have these similar lapses that other players that have been here for a while have been having. And it's, I don't know, it's strange. But once again, I think that is the $1 million question for Dortmund to kind of figure out, because it doesn't make sense for this to be the case.
Eli, you're going to mention something about Schmeichel being shit or something? Right?
No, I was actually gonna mention something I think a bit more insightful, because I think there is something to kind of look at, and that's like Celtic. Like, you look at Arne Engels. Arne Engels was not getting the playing time he wanted for a mid-table Augsburg side, and that's the level of player that Celtic is pushing further up the pitch than he would typically play. Like, he's a 6 or an 8 at the highest level, but in an inferior side, in an inferior league, all of a sudden he gets pushed up into the 10 space because he's so much better than most of the Celtic players. And this is a guy who was like kind of on the outskirts, not yet breaking through the Augsburg first team as like kind of a bit part player. But for Celtic, he's not. And like Brendan Rodgers, you talked about how he's a very attacking coach. And like for Celtic, they're attacking then with like substandard Bundesliga players, like rotation Bundesliga players, and they're playing this open attacking style. So then Dortmund's like press being ineffective doesn't really matter a ton. They're also like a bit less physical, like you said, a bit less tactically in tune. So Dortmund's able to break through the press really easily, and they're able to attack. They're obviously still conceding a ton of chances because we're not good. And later in the show, I'm sure we can talk about some of the issues with why that is. It is still a new coach. Like, we can talk about both of the strikers essentially missing preseason. Schlotterbeck and Anton, because they were at the Euros, delayed start of their preseason. And then because we've been chopping and changing the backline so much, that's again like an issue. But Union Berlin are a defensive side. They have a coherent way of playing. And you look at the match, this match was not played with, like, Shaheen was talking about how we didn't stick to the game plan. But, like, to me, that's almost like him admitting failure, because your job as a coach is to make the game play the way you want it. And, like, I'm sure he is feeling the pressure of that and his understanding of that. And I'm not Shaheen out yet because it's so early. But this game played the way Union Berlin want to play a game, and that's more the issue, that you're seeing the inconsistencies, because there are certain teams that will allow Dortmund to play however they want, and that's because like they play in a similar styles of games to what Dortmund want to play. Because if you're a mid-table Bundesliga side, like you can pick up points by being a bit more positive. So that's like a mid-table side, and then if you're a more workman-like side with a bit of a smaller budget historically, like Union, maybe you play a bit more defensive, like they did, and that's kind of like the difference in this. They have a very coherent way of playing and a very, very strong press, not necessarily high up the pitch, but they have a very strong shape and they stay in that shape, and that kind of imposed the game onto Dortmund. And then you don't necessarily have like a Karim Adeyemi to kind of like bail you out and fix your press, because we talked about this on our show, but like every midfielder aside from Mecha right now has significantly like dropped off in terms of tackles and interceptions. And to me, that says so much about our press is just not working. So last year, I think we didn't really have the most ideal type of press. You saw our defenders have to do a ton of defending, but I think they were kind of set up to defend like specific scenarios. So they were consistently put in the same type of like high risk scenarios. This year, they're just put in a ton of risky scenarios. It's not like the same consistent type of like 1v1 duel for our defenders that they're like specifically good at. It's not continually chasing balls deep and behind. It's just like every game it's a different type of 1v1 scenario repeatedly. And to me, that says like we don't have a way of pressing. Like it's not by design that our center backs have much higher defensive interactions this year. It's because we don't know how to press. And like Karim Adeyemi, one of the things, like you talked about how he's playing a more complete game, he's up half a tackle and interception per 90. And if you're a midfielder, like that might not be a ton because it's still a lot. It's a massive increase in any position. But like for a midfielder, it's a bit less so because you might be just playing a more combative role. But for an attacking player to do that, that's essentially you're looking at like a third of like the average attacker's defensive output. He's increased by that much. So he's gone from being like pretty good to elite. And when you have that in your side, it's a lot easier to defend, even if you have a terrible press, because you have a guy who's so fast and so good at pressing, he can just go and win the ball back and be in the right place to do so. But then you go into Maxi Bayer, who's not terrible at the press, but like he's not as good. And then you have Jamie Bino Gittins, who's not a great presser. Serhou Guirasssy's not a great presser. He's gotten a bit better as he's gotten like more match fit, I think. Like in some of the first games he played, you could see him when the goalkeeper gave the ball up, he would go to chase the center back and allow the pass back to the goalie. And that's like, you have one job at pressing in that situation. And the ball cannot go back to the goalie. I haven't seen that since the first like 2 to 3 matches, but the system itself as a whole is still not utilizing like anyone particularly well. Like, where do Dortmund win the ball when it's on the pitch? And like no one would know because we just don't do it. So that's kind of the thing. I talked for a very long time. I don't know. What do you guys kind of think about that?
Brian?
No, I think you're definitely right. I think without having Adeyemi in the starting 11, you do miss that sort of press. You do miss that energy, that sort of player that's going to harass the defense, because Guirassy, like you said, not necessarily the best presser, is relatively fast when you need him to be, can be a bit of a problem, obviously, for defenses. More than a bit of a problem, I should say. But he's not going to be that player like Adeyemi that's running against the defense 24/7 and making them think, constantly keeping them on their toes. I mean, with Bayer, when he was playing at Hoffenheim, I mean, there was definitely more of an element of pressing.
Yeah, Bayer is the best presser in our attack right now, but like if Jamie Bino Gittins and Serhou Guirassy are a non-factor, and then our midfield right now doesn't have the like right system to have anyone as a factor. Like Emre Can went from almost 4 tackles and interceptions to under 1.9 this season. So like the issue is essentially Kareem Adeyemi has to play to an unreal level to make our like press work. And even then it's like work is like he's kind of more concealing the kind of dross. It's like if you put like a nice green screen over like a cockroach infested background that I thankfully don't have, knock on wood. But that's essentially what Kareem Adeyemi has done. Is he's made things look a lot better than they are. He's also like finishing kind of every chance he's had right now. And like that's more the difference that goes away. You lose a guy who's finishing every chance, who's very creative, and who's papering over like the issue with your press not working by being elite on his own. And then the team doesn't know how to win the ball back because they've been bad at it the whole time. And they've just been relying on the guy who like scores every chance he gets this season pretty much. And also is like running his ass off and winning the ball back on his own. When he's not winning the ball back on his own, they don't know how to create chances as well. They don't know how to win the ball back on as a team. And that's more like my point. It's not necessarily that the fall off with Bayer, who's still our best pressing attacker, is so drastic, but it makes it like harder to play Mullen, for instance, because he doesn't press at all. And like the team needs to find a way to press, whether it's like the midfielders collapsing in or we're dropping off and playing like not pressing at all high up the pitch and literally just dropping into a deep block. Like there needs to be something. They need to find a way to win the ball back and channel the ball into the area they want to win it. Right now, we're not doing any of that, is more my point.
Well, so just to finish my point, with regards to Bayer, I think that because I do disagree slightly in the sense that I do think there is a significant drop off with Bayer, but I think that's okay because he's not a player that's had a lot of minutes. He needs the time on the pitch to be able to get back up to that level. So if he's not getting those minutes when there's opportunities to put him on, I mean, maybe like we were talking about now, I think that's going to be more of an option because injuries and all of that. But prior to that, I mean, not getting as much minutes, then just getting thrust on, you're not going to have that same match fitness. You're not going to be able to press as thoroughly as you would have previously with your previous team. It's once again also learning to play with your teammates. There's a lot of moving factors, specifically with Bayer and himself. But yeah, 100%. You lose a lot of that with Adeyemi. I would think to say it's a little bit unfair to say that they don't know how to do it because they showed last season that they are capable of doing it. Whether Adeyemi
they know how. The team this year isn't doing it.
Yeah,
exactly.
Not, I think that's the way.
It's a coaching issue. Is more how I meant it. Like right now, the team does not know how to do it. The players, like these are professional soccer players. Like Nico Schlotterbeck is an elite center back. He knows that, like he knows how to defend in a way that he's consistently not getting in 1v1s, like on the right side of his box is a left-sided center back. But that's what he was against Union Berlin because he's so exposed by this team. So I 100% agree with you there. Like I think there's a massive drop off attacking wise right now from Adeyemi to Bayer, but I don't think the like pressing difference is completely absurd because I think you're going from a guy who's like 2.3 something tackles and interceptions per 90, who's incredibly fast, to a guy who's also incredibly fast but slightly less so, and is going to be like somewhere over 2 in the right system. And because he's not fast in the way Kareem Adeyemi is, like he can't press the way Kareem Adeyemi can without like a coherent system. In a coherent system, I think they're a lot closer.
100%.
Speaking on the defensive aspects, outside of pressing from the front, you are seeing this team concede goals in a number of ways on all areas of the pitch. Against Stuttgart, you saw the back line falling asleep a handful of times. You saw just in this past weekend against Berlin, Schlotterbeck making a pretty boneheaded tackle, conceding a penalty early on. So the defensive issues are, not to dogpile on Shaheen, but I mean are a bit more apparent and more widespread than one might notice at a first glance. But I do want to switch to on the ball as well, and going back to Bayer here. I am a bit concerned because I agree that he does need more minutes. Of course, he needs more time. Even at the end of the show, it's not going to change. I'm not trying to come at him really because he does need more time. But you are expecting him in a game where he finally does get his first start for the club in the league. If I'm not wrong, I hope I wasn't just speaking out of my ass there. But you did see him get the first start, and it is very underwhelming for the most part.
Did he freeze?
Yeah.
Mason hasn't a lot of great balls yet because did see Matt start to pick up the ball in that middle third, bring it down, and then look for runs as left and right. So oftentimes Bayer wasn't there, or if he was simply having a very poor finish. So is it something for you guys too, where you're thinking this man just simply needs more time when it comes to being on the ball too, or collectively too? Are we needing a bit more tweaking in terms of just like how we approach our attacks? Do you guys have any thoughts of that?
I think at halftime, I think someone clearly spoke to him, and I think he clearly made changes because every time he got on the ball in the first half, he looked a little timid. Like Emre Can made that one run forward and laid the ball off to Bayer. And like I know we're Borussia Dortmund and we should be trying to create the biggest possible chance, but right there you need to shoot that as Maxi Bayer. And in the second half, he gets the ball in a similar place and he takes the shot. Maybe if he takes the first one, he scores the second. But like these aren't great chances, but like he needs to take that chance. And I think the underlying numbers would look a lot more kindly on him if he did. And also, like even more importantly, the thing I saw in the second half was none of the times did it come off. I don't think it came off a single time, but you saw him try and flick the ball past his defender, tried to flick it over their head once, tried to flick it past them on the ground. And that to me is a really good sign because he needs to try things. And then as soon as it comes off once, 3 times and 4 times. Because in soccer, like you need to build up the rhythm and you need to do little things that build your confidence and can create positivity. Because if Maxi Bayer is not playing by running at goal, that's not what he did when he like broke out as a player last year. He runs at goal. That's what he does. And the more he runs at goal, the better he will be. And the more he will help the team because in our right winger is supposed to do that. They are supposed to run at players. They're supposed to get in behind. And those are things Maxi Bayer can do. So once he's kind of gotten his feet under him, I think you're going to see a very different player.
Yeah, I 100% agree with Eli there. And I think I'm not worried about him at all. He's so young. And with the season he had last season, I think he can only build on that. Give him the minutes, give him the time. I think now he's supposed to be possibly called up by the under 21s for the German national team. I mean, take that chance. I mean, Karim Adeyemi did, wrote about it in a piece last week, actually. And I think that was definitely a big part of Adeyemi in particular, building up his confidence to come back and be a better player. I think Bayer should totally do the same thing and take that chance, go play those minutes for the under 21s, show what he's capable of. And as Eli said, building that confidence, we're only going to see a better player.
Kind of surprising that a handful of our wingers in recent years have, I mean, of course, Bayer's still very much in his early days, but have needed much longer than people might realize to actually integrate themselves into this team. I mean, Adeyemi's on year 3 now with not many goal contributions in his first 2 seasons. Of course, he had injuries. Malen been here for a long time. And of course, he's finally at that stature that we wanting him to be at. But I mean, he was, anyone who's listened to the show for a while now, I have dogged on him for his first season and a half or so, or even 2 seasons pretty consistently. But outside of them, I had some other notes here. I mean, like, I think in terms of changes, Şahin was a bit too slow here. Pascal Gross, as much as I rate the man, he is 33 years old and he does not need to be playing close to 90 minutes of football every single game, sometimes 3 times the span of 7 days. I mean, going back to our lineup again, between the Berlin and just a few days before that in the Champions League, there was one switch in this team, and that was Maxi Bayer coming on for the injured Adeyemi. Outside of that, you have basically essentially the exact same starting 11 here, and I just don't think Gross has the minutes for it. Of course, you have the athleticism, the intensity. Whenever he's on it, you have the physicality too from Mecha, and I think he could have done more with some more minutes in this game. This may be a hot take, but I might have even taken Sabitzer at the 7 earlier in this game as opposed to Bayer. I mean, of course, Bayer, like we said, is going to need more time, but I think, sometimes it's just not your day. And Sabitzer, I think, could have brought on a bit more in terms of off the ball, against the ball, and of course with the ball too there. But
Hard disagree. Hard disagree. Because like the right wing, I think, is like that position. Like regardless of it's Shaheen's system or any system, your right winger needs to be able to run quickly. And if you cannot run quickly, then there's so much less space the other team needs to defend. So just having the presence of a guy who is fast over a guy who like can run around the midfield very well and can cover ground very well, but cannot sprint in the way that a winger can. I think like that to me, that would scare me a lot less having to defend like Sabitzer, because then I know I don't need to worry about anything on the right wing until we're sitting in a deep block in our own final third. And then it's going to be Koto's overlap. And it's literally just the overlap. Like there's no inside, there's no cutting inside onto a left foot, like because Sabitzer's not like the best dribbler. So it just becomes so much easier to defend. And then I can have like my left center back kind of pinch in on Seru and 2v1 him for most of the game because there's just no pace on the right side.
Of course, Sabitzer doesn't have the pace of Bayer, but for me, it's just a matter of, whenever Bayer, like we mentioned, had kind of a tale of two halves, both pretty disappointing, but he changed his game a bit. And, when you suffer from that kind of like that tunnel vision of having like a lot of pressure and maybe your first start and your finish is just not going your way, I think the likes of someone who's a lot more experienced, has played at that 7, can pick his head up and maybe find someone else like Brandt, Girassi, of course, or even Kuto too. I mean, we saw him get in a lot of advanced positions this game. But also even then, I had my notes here. I mean, Benzabaini could have maybe done a little bit more minutes this game as well. But that was just my line of thinking there for Sabitzer. Brian, do you have anything for that?
Yeah, I mean, Sabitzer on the wing has kind of become a meme, right? But I totally see what you're saying in terms of a player who's played and has that experience. In terms of players that we could have played there too, I mean, maybe this is kind of a little bit of an out of the box kind of shout. But you mentioned Yan Kuto. I mean, he has played as a winger in the past or as a left-sided or right-sided midfielder. So, I mean, he's a very creative player. We've seen that he's able to cross the ball. He's really good with through balls. I mean, that could have been an option with Rierson behind him and then Benzabaini on the left. I mean, there's an option to do that there. I'm not really sure we're at that point where we necessarily need to do that. But it's an option and it's something to think about. But to your point about, the wingers taking as long as they have to kind of, gel and play in these positions. And this is something I've been harping on for a very long time. A lot of our wingers aren't natural wingers. Bayer is a second striker. Malen is a second striker. These are not players that made their names playing out wide necessarily. Yeah. We already mentioned it earlier in the pod. Bayer made his name at Hoffenheim playing in a front two with Kramaric. Malen played in a front two at PSV when he made his name and when we brought him in. Granted, like, yes, he did play out wide, and his ability to play out wide is why he was brought in to replace Sancho when he was, but he was never going to be a Sancho replacement because he's not a one-to-one player. And that's kind of the same thing. If you put Bayer out on the wing, he's not a winger. He's a second striker. He can play the role of a winger, but that's not his natural position. I think out of all the players that we brought in, I mean, Adeyemi does fit that mold closest alongside Jamie Gittins, on the wing. So, I mean, those two, I would say, are our purest wingers when they're on the pitch in a front three with Girassi. But if you're going to put a second striker out wide, you're not going to get the same actions as you would from a more natural winger. I mean, they're completely different players to Gittins. So it's going to be a completely different type of game. And I think that's part of the reason we haven't seen that quote unquote natural wing play that we would expect from our wingers, because at the end of the day, that's just not what the players that were playing in that position, that's not their forte necessarily. So.
Good stuff. Good stuff. I am on a bit of a time crunch here, so I just don't want to get to this last overarching thought I had for the show. Of course, we're going to have a bit of a break here for the international duties for a lot of these players coming up this next weekend. So Dortmund are not going to have their next Bundesliga fixture until October 18th against St. Pauli at home. I am still concerned, and I don't think this is, although, of course, this is coming at a good timing with the injuries and Shaheen definitely needing to find some things out tactically. I am a bit concerned about some of these fixtures coming up, whether it's the Champions League, we play Madrid right after that St. Pauli game. Not even a few weeks after that, we play Leipzig, who has been giving it to us lately. Do you guys think this team is sleepwalking into another hammering like Stuttgart? Because I can accept losing. Of course, I'm not expecting us to be off to a perfect start under a new coach, but it's the way that we are losing these games that really concerns me. I mean, you can go down the list of just any of these last few games that we've lost or even not gotten just a win out of. That is kind of a thought that's crossed my mind. I didn't know if you guys had anything for that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably going to be in the minority in saying this, but as much as we're saying this Union Berlin game was a must-win game, just looking at the goals and how they were scored, I mean, yes, defensive lapses, but and yes, tactics, but it also came down to kind of like fluky individual mistakes. I mean, like how many times in a season do you expect Nico Schlotterbeck to give away a penalty like that? I don't expect that to be a norm. For the second goal, I give Kobel a bit of a benefit of the doubt there too, because he was fairly unsighted for it. Like if you really look at the way that ball comes in, there's 3 Dortmund players plus the Union Berlin player that's shooting. Like that player is obscured by his defense. And I think only Girassi or somebody picked his leg up to try and stop it. I think it just came in simply too fast and Kobel was unsighted. I think that in a different situation, maybe Kobel saves that. And that's not to excuse the fact that, we only scored 1 goal through our left back, no less. But it comes down to kind of what we've been thinking about. I'm still not super worried about this season because we're still only 4 points behind the top spots. So it's not as bad as it's been in previous seasons when we look at the proximity to the positions that we want to be in. And I think if the players continue to buy in to what Shaheen is trying to, kind of convey to them, and the players that we want, that we're talking about, like Bayer, and all the other new players, Girassi, Kuto, Gross, continue to gel with the team, and they sort of continue to learn to play together, I think we start seeing better results. Leipzig will always be a tough game in the Bundesliga because they do have a quality side. It's Leipzig. I don't like to, say nice things about them, but I have to, unfortunately, in this case. But yeah, I mean, Madrid is Madrid. They're not in the best form that they could be right now. So, I mean, if Stuttgart is able to give them a run for their money, we have the quality to do that as well. It really will just depend on what Dortmund decides to show up on the night. And it is a bit of a mixed bag, so I totally understand your concerns. But I'm still not in full panic mode just yet because we are getting into this with a new coach, a new system, new players. Let's ride it out a little bit before we start to panic.
So I think we're terrible right now. I think we might continue to struggle, but like there are things to point at that are like very clear things to point at that legitimately, even if Shaheen is the best coach ever, he would still need to kind of make his team work. And if you look at Anton and Schlotterbeck, like we started the season, Schlotterbeck's basically playing as a left back. And it's only in these last like 2-3 games that we've really gotten to see what we would have on paper, I guess, thought our center back partnership was. And I think that, like, right or wrong, Shaheen needs to ride with who he thinks the best 2 center backs are. Because I think if you put in Sula right now, like Schlotterbeck already has 3/4 of a season, full season, playing next to Sula. And I think we'd get better short term. But if Shaheen thinks that we'll be better long term by playing Anton next to Schlotterbeck, then do it by all means. And like, let's see them develop that partnership. Let's see them develop that understanding. Like Brian says, he doesn't think that we see Schlotterbeck make that bad a tackle that many times again this season. I disagree on that because last year we saw Mats Hummels with multiple red cards, multiple penalties conceded. So that might be something you see. I think that, again, it comes back to the press. Like, maybe the players start to figure out what Shaheen's saying. Maybe someone says something, says the same thing a little bit differently, and something clicks for a couple of these guys, and they start to figure it out. And then we know how to win the ball back on the pitch and like get the ball into the right areas, because we've seen the attacking talent this team has. So it's really about like, can you make a couple things click? And I think like the bright side of Adeyemi being out is his ability to press, like regardless of the system around him. Like maybe now you start to see how the system actually performs, and Shaheen can maybe tweak it a little bit, and then it starts to work. Maybe the midfield figures it out, figures out the system, and things work. Guirassy did not have a preseason. Maybe he starts to develop an understanding. Like, you can't just drop. This isn't FIFA. You don't just drop players into the side and they start playing the correct passes to each other. These guys have to learn the type of runs each different player likes to make in order to like play a long pass to some of these guys. And once you get that understanding, then I think things can get a lot better. And like, I think you just need to hope that things haven't clicked with the team in terms of hearing Shaheen's message. And they start to hear it, and then they figure it out, and we start playing better football. And then you have like an understanding between the three attackers, and an understanding between your center backs, and you buy Tom Rotha back in January because you don't have a left back, and he just cooked your £20 million signing. But I think that there's very simple ways we can get better. It's very hard for us to get worse. But I did say that last year. Well, I guess we did get better towards the end of last year. We made a Champions League final, so maybe I was right there. But like, things could definitely get worse. I should say that because like it could get toxic, like it did towards the end of the first half of last season, and it could end with a very bad run of form. But there are so many things that will like almost certainly get better. With the amount of new players we have, when you add this many players to your starting 11, it's almost like impossible to get better in the short term. And having that win against Frankfurt on match day 1 is looking like incredible, because you got one of your probably hardest matches of the season out of the way, and you got 3 points from it. And so maybe now when you like drop 3 points against Union Berlin by playing like shit, then like it makes up for it, because we were always going to have these massive betting in problems with a new manager and a new right back and a new right center back and a new midfielder and a new striker, and then Jamie Bino Gittins coming in as a starting winger now, even though he was already at the club. Now you're looking at like half your team, a new left back in from the last half of last season. Like, there were always going to be issues. And having this much turnover, like there was always going to be issues. And maybe that's why the press isn't working, is because you have too many new guys coming in, and maybe in 2 months, it all clicks and they start firing, and Adeyemi comes back, and then all of a sudden we're really going. But I don't know, like it could also go to shit. Like, Shaheen could just be terrible. So
Time will tell.
I do want to say for the record that Ryerson did start at left back this game and score against his old club. So shout out to Ryerson for obviously didn't rescue us the points, but I mean, he did arguably more than JG did that whole time of just his few appearances in those advanced positions on the left-hand side here. Hopefully over these next...
Gittins created that goal. What are we talking about?
A little under 2 weeks here. Hopefully Shaheen has some time to get with the squad and figure some things out. We have a handful of players out on international duty, including Anton Grosch, Schlotterbeck, Malin, Savitzer, Kobel, Ryerson, Guirassy, Benzabaini, Gittins, and Bayer. Of course, Fachin is as well, but he's not, at the moment seeing many senior minutes. So a lot of players missing, but also still plenty to work with here, and hopefully to get some tweaks and hit the ground running, because again, we do have some hard fixtures coming up here, guys. Thank you for joining me. Of course, again, we'll have the links here for Dortmund Dispatch in the description. Do you guys want to shout out anything for yourselves individually?
Nah, just follow our pod as well. Give us a listen. But thank you for having us, Carver. Always a pleasure to be here. Always happy to chat with you here on the BVB podcast. So thanks.
Yeah, unfortunate Jake could not make it. But thank you so much for having me. Big thumbs down for Jake for not making it. But thank you for having me. That was from you. I was just not me, Jake. I would never say that. I was just stating
Except
what Carver
you did
did.
say it, so own it.
Whoa. I'm just like saying like history. Like that was history. That happened. Carver did it, not me.
Excuses.
Yeah.
But no, thank you so much for having us. You have a great podcast. So thank you so much for having us on, and have a good one.
Thank you for the kind words, Jake. Appreciate you editing this. Have fun, and even though you're on
love you,
vacation,
Jake.
Appreciate you. Yeah, we will see you guys soon. Thank you so much.